What's up, sluts? It's everybody's favorite pimp here. Happy Shavuot, you sluts. Um, no one really knows for sure. Different Elohim Chaim, but this is the Missouri Rebbe, but we've been doing this for 147 days. 3761 Krishna, the road birth of Adam, about 36, 31, 130. Seth, son of Adam, was born 35, 26, 235. Enosh, son of Seth, was born 34, 36. 325. Kenan, son of Enosh, was born 33, 66. 395. Mahalalel, Kenan, son of Mahalalel, son of Kenan, was born 33, 66. 395. Mahalalel, son of Kenan, was born 3301. 60. Yered, son of Mahalalel, was born 31, 39. 622. Hanak, son of Yered, was born. It's 6th of Sivan, 5786, Friday, May 22nd. No one really knows what day it is, though. Really don't for sure.
Dr. Justin Sledge, and welcome to Esoterica. We explore the arcane in history, philosophy, and aspects, and starting to study Jewish mysticism and Kabbalah is getting a handle on just how those ideas develop. Over time. It's tempting to think that for Kabbalah has just always existed in the
First morning. What did I do? What's wrong with that? Body exposure. No way. Let's see the video. Show me the fucking video, dog.
I'm Dr. Justin Slush, and welcome to Esoterica, where we explore the arcane in history, philosophy, and religion. One of the most difficult aspects in starting to study Jewish mysticism and Kabbalah is getting a handle on just how those ideas developed over time. It's tempting to think that, for instance, Kabbalah has just always existed in the form that we have it, or that Kabbalah is just one thing at all. Of course, neither of these positions is really tenable. Such notions developed greatly through the ages and are still developing. And there are now, and there have always been, numerous mutually exclusive schools of Jewish mysticism and Kabbalah. This class is meant to serve as an introduction to Jewish mysticism and Kabbalah from the point of view of its incredibly complex development from the prophets of ancient Israel, the rise of modern Hasidism in the 18th century. Of course, this series isn't meant to be exhaustive by any means, but only should serve as a springboard for deeper study and reflection, and hopefully it will also enable you to situate developments in Jewish mysticism and Kabbalah, historical and cultural texts, and hopefully embolden you to dive into the primary texts, which are admittedly as sublime as they are obscure. Let me express my gratitude to Congregation Tia for allowing me to use these lectures to reach a larger audience here on Esoterica. If you want, you can find the entire series under the playlist Entering the Garden, an Introduction to Jewish Mysticism and Kabbalah. I'll be uploading them over the next few weeks, or if you find these episodes after autumn of 2021, you can find them in that. If you find this series on Kabbalah interesting, I'd hope you check out my other content on topics in esotericism, and perhaps consider supporting the production of free academic, or perhaps information. You can find those links below, and I really appreciate it. After 13, what was supposed to be a 9-series exploration of Jewish mysticism and Kabbalah, and of course, 14 sessions is still few. Keep teaching this class one day a week for the rest of all the things there are to say about Jewish mysticism and Kabbalah. I'll be very, very honest. This last session is going to in some ways be the thinnest because this is where my expertise really runs out, and I'll be very frank about that. It's just honestly the case. My expertise, I hit a wall, and my wall really is mysticism. I don't know if I really should. So learning about custom, everything from roughly the first century. My knowledge, the gaps in our knowledge, not to pretend we know things we don't. And it's definitely from Hasidism. That's a lot more than I do. In fact, I just invite a good friend of mine to do some talks, maybe at least a talk average to see about Hasidism. I really do feel like I did David Schrift and it deserves a lot more attention than I gave it. And so a really good friend of mine who knows a lot about Hasidism to maybe do a lunch and learn. So we'll see if that works out. But at any rate, welcome to the end. It's welcome to the ellipsis, the ... Because
No beginning a cultural ellipsis rather fucking out to not for this packet and for this guys later and not anymore.
actually a lot better
Look at
now.
the Senate, the University of Rothschild was
It was doing in the middle of the 20th century, the middle of the 20th century, I would say that Kabbalah and doing it in a substantial way. We're not saying goodbye to Hasidism or just goodbye to Kabbalah. Rather, we're saying ... It's going to continue to grow and change. And I've heard really cool and exciting things about developments in the Haredi world, where we're in sort of new and dynamic Kabbalistic thought. And if we do end up with Israel Palestine at least for a few months next year, I'm looking forward to kind of getting into that and seeing this there in Jerusalem. Well, as we marched last time, the sort of post-Shabbatite world is, I would say that it's actually more sophisticated in many ways than the Shabbatite world. The Shabbatite world is marked by a relatively thin understanding of Kabbalah, really. And that's part of why Shabbatite study was so successful, is that people really didn't understand what was going on. They weren't really Kabbalah. And when you read something of a very technical nature, you can be overwhelmed by it and very convinced by things that aren't really true or deep. They can sound or not. And I think the kind of reason to justify the stuff that went on was actually pretty fascinating. I think that once people actually scratch the surface of it and realize, oh, this is just, gold gilding.
What up, pimp?
So the years after Shabbatite peace, apostasy, and the whole business, what you get is a kind of conservative backlash in the world of Kabbalah. And that shouldn't be surprising because the whole Shabbatite business is a complete disaster. And so what ends up happening is it's kind of a closing of the ranks. That is to say, in the Kabbalistic world, after this, what people end up doing is returning to the Kabbalah much like the period before Shabbatite, where things were a bit more closed off, started a bit more silent, which I think is probably not always for the worst. And so the developments within Kabbalah, in fact, the Kabbalah since then have been you don't see major Lurian. A significant post-Lurianic Kabbalah is at some point become commentary footnotes to Isaac Luria. And so that relatively conservative moment, that relatively conservative movement marks Kabbalah from about the mid-17th century all the way until now. And as we talked about last time, two major Kabbalistic schools developed in the aftermath of everything. One of those in Jerusalem, led by the Mizrahi Rabbi ViralRabbi, and another in Brody in Poland. And those two...
Doug, do you remember that time I said what up?
Are
you ready to lose?
So Kabbalah,
All right. Well, I need a few moments.
especially in the Sephardic world, really niche.
You're good.
And I think that has a lot to do with the fact that the Sephardi world was much more stable than the Ashkenazi world at that time in terms of social stability and Jewish education. So again, I think I mentioned this several times ago that a lot of the people that were really seduced by the Shabbattian movement were people who only recently really come back to Judaism. And so they don't really anchored in Judaism in a very profound way, in a way that, for instance, the communities in Marrakesh, the communities in Baghdad, they've been there for easily 1,000 years. And so when they had feeding, they were like, no. Because they have deeper education. So this world is a bit less affected by the whole thing. And so it's not surprising that in Jerusalem, who never accepted the whole Shabbatine business to begin with, they excommunicated him as soon as they could, that one of the largest Kabbalistic schools in the develop. And as I mentioned, it's going to take the form of really intense. And that school again will last basically until 1969, when the last adherent of that school dies, which is amazing how long the school lasted for hundreds of years, although very tightly guarded, very disciple student oriented. And of course, the other is a Klois and Poland, influenced by Polish and Lithuanian Kabbalah and Jewry. And Polish and Lithuanian Kabbalah is going to be mostly remarked by its intense intellectual Kabbalistic stuff. And so out of that world is going to flow a mountain of highly intellectualized Kabbalistic systems that are going to basically try to do the work of systematizing the Varian system, which I prefer. This period also saw, as I talked about last time, the rise of Hasidism. Hasidism is probably the most important, it's the most important movement in Judaism probably in the past 300 years. And Hasidism went on to spawn an entirely new system of Judaism, a new system of social relations, a new system of customs, a new system of dress, all kinds of things that come out of the Hasidic world, a whole new style of song. The nigging that I'm sure you have come out of the Hasidic world. And so it's from that world where we have a focus on dreams, but also piety meant to find the divine in the everyday. It's a piety in which God is lurking all about you, but you can't see God. The divine is everywhere. I think of the line from the Quran, which I can easily imagine a Hasidic Rebbe having written, where the Quran says that Allah is supposed to do your jugular vein. That in Quran is always struck me incredibly evocative. And I think like Nachman and Breslov having written something just like that. So the idea that the divine is that close to you. The obstacle is just you. You and your ego are fundamentally you and your lusts and your desires. It's your desire to get rich or to have fame or to be loved by someone or whatever. It's these things that get in the way of your relationship with the divine, because the divine for the Hasidic movement is right there. You just have to do the work of a tool of barriers between you and the divine, and it's in the erasure of those barriers that one can experience the divine in the everyday, including even in the movements of one's physical body, the sound of a bird. Some of the Rebbe's were even alleged to be able to understand the language of the birds. They would listen to birds sing, and they said they're singing, they're talking, they're having theological debates that the Rebbe's could understand the Vogelsprache. And Vogelsprache allowed them to hear the debate rabbis of the birds, rather than just hearing like the rest of us, normie people that all hear birds. The Rebbe's, they don't hear birds, they hear the debates among the birds about God. And so I always found that to be a very beautiful example of Hasidism, where it's not just, you're not just hearing bird sound, you're hearing theological debates among the animal world. So again, according to the Hasidic idea, divine every aspect of life, and to cleave to God, the Dvekus. The Dvekus is the clinging to God, and you cling to God, and the way that you do this at some level by cultivating a relationship with kind of shamanic character in the Hasidic world. This is the Rebbe, or the sometimes there are tzaddikim, tzaddukim, there are these righteous people in relationship that are intensely holy. They operate a bit like royalty, still to the Rebbe, to your Rebbe, and discuss it. Encounters that are primarily through the Rebbe, and it's in that really grows up today. A little stranger with us about the Babish movement, which I forgot to mention much in a little bit as well, but that develops. So, as we stopped last time, the sort of cliffhanger from last time was that what I think that no one really realized in the aftermath of the whole Shabbat thing, that as much as the Shabbatai Tzvi business was a disaster, the same year that Shabbatai Tzvi converted to Islam, I'm not sure as many folks in the room know, 1666 is a dynamite year in the history of science. It's the year that Isaac discovered or invented calculus. Of course, he discovered Leibniz. There's a bit of debate about that. It's also the same year that Newton discovered the fundamental nature of light, and he basically figured out Newtonian physics as we know it now. And he published all the time that Newton is figuring all that out and stuff. That's the year Shabbatai Tzvi converts to Islam. So it's difficult. I know about Shabbatai's conversion. I think of it as a medieval thing. It's something that happened a long, long time ago. And I think of somehow Newton not having happened a long, long time ago. Newton feels very modern to me. It feels like I could just sort of, we could play chess with somebody like Star Trek. And they happened at the same time. They happened the exact same year. And so what's coming down the pike, and what I think the Jewish world did not see in the aftermath of this entire Shabbat, the Enlightenment happened all around the Jewish world, in France, and in North America, and in England, and Holland, and Germany. The Enlightenment was developing a huge, completely new worldview that was dynamically breaking from what had come before, with its emphasis on rationality, its emphasis on experience, its emphasis on extreme logic. Descartes, like Spinoza. Spinoza's philosophy rejects it as a God separate from nature. It's just nature, and nature is God, and God is nature. It's the same thing. We're getting the mechanistic philosophers. The philosophers believe that all of nature is like a giant machine. If you study it carefully, you can understand how it works. And if you understand how it works, you can predict it, and therefore you can make it do things for you. This incredibly mechanistic philosophy is, in many ways, really wonderful, and in many ways, I think, quite bad. In the Jewish world, it's doorstep. When I say what I really mean is Napoleon showed up. The world spirit on horseback. Napoleon shows up in Central Europe. Even used to. Remember, he marched all Russia. So everywhere Napoleon went, brought with him these Enlightenment ideas. His army was a sort of enlightened army, as much as armies are ever enlightened. And Napoleon brought with him the metric system. He brought with him French Revolutionary ideas. He brought with him the idea that if you're a citizen of a country, then you should have equal protection under the law. There should never be second-class citizens. Either you're a citoyen, and if you are a citoyen, you have rights and privileges of everyone else that is affected by the rational law. I'm not saying Napoleon was perfect or anything like that, but he was a big enough deal that Hegel thought at some level he represented the very movement of the Geist, the very movement of God in the realization of Godness in the world. And of course, Hegel got disappointed with him later, but made a big impression on the young Hegel. And so this is at the same time that the Hasidic movement is taking off. And so when these two movements come into conflict with each other, come into contact with each other, there's going to be a break-off in the Jewish world. Are going to become very attracted to enlightened values, and they're going to incorporate those enlightened values into the Jewish world. And that is called the Haskalah, the Enlightenment. And they're going to Enlightenment ideas. The idea of equal protection.
All right, you ready for your invite?
Because of what you believe in, that we have system of weights measures that we do in the world. That the scientific
I have a marketplace, and I can't deny this, but I possibly that YouTube and TikTok don't like mine embedding videos of copyrighted music in them. So if someone wanted to use a song that is copyrighted, would it make sense to just tell them to upload to TikTok or YouTube?
You just want to say you can't use copyrighted material on your platform.
I imagine for many of the Jewish folks in this class, you are the children of the great masculine of the enlightened folks.
Like I can't forward you can't embed a video from TikTok if it has copyright music.
If they want to post it on your platform, then they just have to either mute it or remove the sound.
Yeah, but TikTok Reels and stuff, they have, and even Instagram, but like TikTok, you can add all these different music into your video.
Right.
Sure they're right, but it's a more bigger selection of sounds. So if those are able to be embedded into the site, isn't that fine?
They realized how much of a threat this was. They were terrified of this.
Are they down
on the traditional aspects of it. And so
yeah.
Then they can't use those in your on. I mean, the same is true on Instagram right now. I can't go and have a copyrighted song and upload it to Instagram. That's not allowed.
No, it is. Look at your TikTok bots that are just using every song in their library and making a reel about it.
That's in their library. That's that library. Yes, they are copyrighted, but it's in their library. That is not me singing uploading it. That's their list of songs that you can use. You can't upload that song on a TikTok reel.
I mean, isn't your bot like it's tagging the sound and using that song in your reel that you're uploading to them?
Yeah, but that's already on their platform. What I'm saying is, let's say I sing a song on a TikTok reel. It's not even what it's called, but whatever. TikTok video. Maybe it is, but I don't know. TikTok, and I sing with the sound coming to my speakers, and I upload it. It will not let me publish that because it will say that it is a copyright violation.
Yeah, no, I get that, but I'm saying like the songs that are in their library, like the ones that your bot is creating reels from, those are common.
Yeah, but I wouldn't get involved with that because the copyright on that changes all the time. So sometimes you'll make one and it'll get muted because TikTok lost the rights to be able to publish that song.
Okay.
They continue to produce Kabbalah as if nothing was.
Just checking, I guess.
You're good. All right, are you ready for your invite?
Corrected. Garbage.
Also, it's worth pointing out that the Chabad movement becomes sort of the intellectual center.
Are you going to accept your invite, or are you going to just jerk yourself off raw?
I'm waiting on you.
Becomes much more of a rigorous system of acidic to just or whatever. So this is a period of people love, which I imagine most folks have heard of. Nachman Breslov, probably one of the most famous rabbis of this time period. He's of course known for his deep spiritual reflection existential torment that he experiences. He was a person of great highs and great lows. I guess most historical people who we end up remembering manic depressive in this way, and so the extreme joy and sorrow he was capable of feeling. And hopefully he's going to get right to the segment we'll talk about in a minute, but also the Nanashi, which I imagine if you've ever spent time in Israel, you will at some point encounter some Nana guys, which tend to smell as pious as they are. They wear the knit cap music and dance around. They're generally pious to a fault. So those guys are out there and they're dealing the neolithic world. Of course, also this time period, probably one of the most important Jewish philosophers and mystics is also writing. This is a Ramchal, Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, probably the greatest traditional Jewish mind of the early modern period. And Luzzatto wrote a mountain of stuff. I've probably read one or two of them. He wrote 50-something books. It's an enormously huge output. But the Ramchal is known as a young man for having had a spiritual experience where he had a body or a spiritual teacher begin to reveal him all kinds of spiritual things. He was relatively young when this happened, and anyone talking to the spiritual and so he kind of got kicked out of Italy a little bit. He got Italy, and this led him on a journey through Europe. And in his journey through Europe, he ended up writing a ton of stuff. His two most famous books are Derech Hashem, The Way of the Lord. Derech Hashem is probably the most systematic, collection or systematization of Judaism that incorporates both philosophical issues and Kabbalah into one system. Derech Hashem is a really, really great book. You can get it in Hebrew and English if you want to study it. It's a fantastic text that really does the work of combining the sort of philosophy of the day, although the philosophy is a little outdated, but his other major book is a book on Edom, Masilia Shari. It's also really, really great to read, and also you can get it in English too. And there's even study sessions, so they study these books over and over again all through the year. So Derech Hashem and Shari are classics of Judaism. They become classics of Judaism. And again, probably say he's the most important rabbi of this period. At some level, he's probably the most important rabbi of this period. And so, very, very important fact. Also, over in Eastern Europe, they're also continuing to do classical Kabbalah. A lot of what's happening at this point in Kabbalistic texts are a lot of systems, which are trying again to systematize the Orientic system. But also, there are a lot of encyclopedic texts where they're just going through and trying to list things, describe what things are. One of the problems that comes along with more technical Kabbalah is that the Hebrew language just isn't actually that good at doing philosophy. There are a lot of technical reasons why this is. German is a far better language for doing philosophy, even than English. And Hebrew is a sort of clumsy language when it comes to doing philosophy. And it's also a bit of a clumsy language when it comes to doing Kabbalah, ironically enough. And terms in Kabbalah are very, very confusing. Considering this time, it's like is one of the books I would love to see translated. I have it downstairs, but I can read it. The idea of translating it is beyond me. But it's the Sefer Karnaim. Sefer Karnaim is an encyclopedia of the Klipot. The Klipot, as you may remember, are the shards left over in the process of creating the world, and those shards that are left over are actually demonic. Those are the demons that sort of haunt the Orientic world, and it's an encyclopedia of all the demons. And so we actually get a system of the evil detritus left over from the creation of the world in the 18th, 19th century.
fuck? How is that?
You probably also know in all of this, through the 19th century, the amount of anti-Semitism Semitism gets a new added dimension. It's become more and more part of secular civil society. There's also anti-Semitism that emerges at the level of discrimination of Jews in secular civil society. Of course, the most famous and infamous example of this is the Dreyfus Affair in the 19th century in France. And so, with this, it was uptick in anti-Semitism and the ongoing reality of anti-Semitism. There's sort of three distinct ideas, basically, about what to do about it. One idea is the traditional idea: double down on being pious, and God will protect you. It's going to go in theory for many thousands of years, but that theory no one's given up on yet. So one is double down on being pious, and God will protect you. The other theory is that at some level, you just need to get out of Europe. Europe is just in debt. We've been living in Europe now for 1,000 years, and for a year, it's been a nightmare. It's just been pogrom after crusade, after blood libel, after witch hunt, after whatever. It's just that the Europeans are never going to accept us, and at some level, eventually they're going to kill us all. It's just a matter of time. Turns out they were right.
Hi, Carly.
What do? You leave. You leave Europe. You pack your bags, and you leave Europe. And in the mid-19th century, that idea takes the form of secular Zionism. This is where Ashkenaz Jews, enlightened, decide as a group that the situation in Europe is basically untenable and to leave. And this is the emergence, of course, of very, very late Zionism. Now, it's two things that are worth noting here about really early Zionism is that it was entirely a secular movement at first. In fact, it didn't really get to have much religious backing until the mid-20s. And so Zionism was a secular, largely socialist, although not all of it was socialist, not all of it was socialist in the way we would recognize it now. And now it did accept some messianic themes. It was sort of apocalyptic in its narrative and in its the way it talked about the world. It wasn't really informed by Kabbalah, but I think that it was informed. If you read a lot of the language of the early Zionists, you will see a lot of the exile redemption language. You will see a lot of language that is coming in from the Kabbalah, although I think it's mostly through social osmosis, right? So let me make that more clear, put a finer point on it. The Zionist movement early on was never influenced by Kabbalah directly. Although I think that there is some Kabbalistic ideas that have reached into Zionism, mostly because of sort of social osmosis, because of Jews, and they've been raised on a diet of Kabbalah and Torah. So that's one part of it. The other part of it with the Zionist movement is that, from a religious perspective, it was completely verboten. It was completely an Avera. The religious world rejected Zionism, and when I say the religious world rejected Zionism, most of them rejected Zionism. It still says Zionism is a toxic ideology that's Palestinians, and it is irreligious. It's blasphemous. It's straight up heresy. And so this early, and even the Reform movement, in Germany, at the very beginning of the Reform, they rejected Zionism. Make conferences. Fall in of popular religion. Sorry, well, folks have been watching the very wonderful show, basically. You'll know, so right every time that they bring the Zionist up, Shulam's brother always says, he refers to the Zionism, he refers to Zionism as Shulam, the evil people. He always called Shulam the evil people. And so this is a thing that develops on in the response to so the game in many ways certainly wasn't until after the Indian War that in a big way you get really Zionism. Of course, it continues to right. It's not like It's like the Kabbalah stops. Slide. Oh yes, this is a mistaken slide, but there's an extra thing down here I want to talk about. This is I must have mucked this slide up. But anyway, the last thing I want to talk about here is that in the 19th century, what also happens in the non-Jewish world is there's sometimes what is referred to as the occult revival. The occult revival was a re-interest in occult sciences, alchemy, and sort of a romantic interest in this stuff. And what you get are people like Ebenezer Sibley and Barrett, who are people who published the Magus. You have a bunch of people really interested in the occult again, and this sort of occult revival that the 19th century also incorporates some older elements of Christian Kabbalah, and they ultimately develop a new form of Kabbalah out of Christian Kabbalah that gets referred to as the Hermetic Kabbalah. And this is a completely non-Jewish, occult-centered version of the Kabbalah, primarily used for engaging in ceremonial magic. So we have every Mason Renaissance magic, and then that being fused together with some elements of Kabbalah, and that develops what we now refer to as the Hermetic Kabbalah, which is another third branch of Kabbalah that is developed. There's, of course, with a K, there is Christian Kabbalah with a C, and now this developed eventually in the early 19th century, 20th century into Hermetic Kabbalah with a Q, and cult practice all the way to this day. So again, in the 19th, another mutation, although not in Jewish, but primarily in the non-Jewish world, primarily in England, where this occult revival will take place. So the Hermetic Kabbalah is out there and it proves very popular. There's a whole big world of people whose spirituality is wrapped up with the very sophisticated, very complicated systems of So as I mentioned, right, just a minute ago, one of the other strategies, right, so we have one strategy, double down, being traditional. The other strategy is leave, go to Palestine or wherever. The other strategy that I mentioned a minute ago, too, is assimilation. Assimilation was a very daring strategy, and perhaps I think one of the more difficult, and I think that the job of assimilating, I think, get written off as traitors or something. I think it's really unfortunate the way we talk about that generation of folks. But assimilation was the really difficult task of trying to maintain two things at once. It was trying to maintain being Jewish and also trying to maintain your identity in a world that rejected you. Trying to be German and be Jewish. Whatever German meant, it's never really accepted you anything, almost, right? You know, people like Husserl. Husserl was the great German philosopher whose son fought in World War I and still got fired when the Nazis took over. They were Nazis, dangerous. They were almost hiding among you. The thing about this that assimilation was always going to be at some level a losing game. But what ends up, at least in the academic, or at least in the religious world, rather, that Judaism early on had to basically come to look like Lutheranism. They had to make that look as much like the Lutheranism of the 1920s. Right? Ethical monotheism. And if you look at it's just like the organs and stuff, classical reform synagogue, the organs, the choir, and they even moved Shabbat to Sunday mornings and all kinds of stuff. They were desperately trying to fit in. And again, that is devastating. The reality of anti-Semitism was at that time and how awful. And at the same time, I admire the courage to try to bring German and French and Jewish in a world that you basically rejected by both sides, no matter what you do. I think it's very heroic and a very difficult path to march. On the academic front, part of what had to justify the viability of Judaism is to buy to the world of the theologians, and that's the theologians largely of Lutheran theology in the mid-time. some of the most amazing scholarship in the world when it comes to the Bible. This is a time period where critical source theory was being developed. This is a time where systematically studied the manuscripts of these things, period of enormous erudition. In fact, I would say the German biblical scholarship of 10 years probably is more erudite scholarship than 30 years of what we do. It's amazing. These guys, they just knew 15 languages. They just did. That's just how they worked. They just had the whole Bible. They just had chunks of the Hebrew Bible memorized. So the scholarship was very driven by pietist, careful. And so what's emerging at the same time is the attitude to do the same thing in Judaism. And the attitude to do the same thing in Judaism was largely spearheaded by a group of Jewish Haskalah scholars. This movement became known as the Wissenschaft movement. And Raza, I beg your forgiveness if I mispronounce my German stuff as I go. So the scientific study was a movement in the academic Jewish world to study Jewish literature using all the modern tools at that time of German scholarship to study religious literature. And they had to make a decision about what they studied, because what they studied and what they published basically represented Judaism to the outside academic world. So, what did they study? What did they publish? Well, Talmud. They focused their energy on the Talmud. Why? Because the Talmud, for one, is a highly systematic, highly argumentative book based on logic. They can argue that Judaism is rational. The Talmud book of arguments driven by logic. And therefore Judaism, right? So we have the ethical components of the Hebrew Bible, and we have the logical components of the Talmud, and therefore Judaism is respectable because it's a paragon of logic. Well, guess what isn't paragonological? Kabbalah. So, what did the Wissenschaft movement do? They ignored it. Basically pretended it wasn't the case. Why? Because it was embarrassing. It was superstition. It was occultism. It was nonsense, made up, fraudulent stuff. For them, for the Wissenschaft movement, Kabbalah was embarrassment. It put back into the darkness of the Middle Ages. Because it made Jews look crazy. If you've been listening to some of the stuff I've been saying over the past 14 weeks, you think to yourself, God, that sounds nuts. Well, it does sound nuts. And can you imagine a bunch of Jewish scholars presenting that to a bunch of erudite Lutheran scholars being like, yes, Judaism. You believe that God masturbated reality into existence. What? That's not going to fly, right? It's going to make them hate you. It's going to reinforce every negative stereotype about the Jews. The Jews are irrational. They're driven by superstition. They believe in nonsense. The Wissenschaft movement had to make a decision was not Kabbalah, Talmud. And so early on, Kabbalistic literature was largely put on the back burner, to put it politely. And as you might know, at the same time this is happening, this is also the same time that all of the movements of Judaism are beginning to form. The Reform movement, the Conservative movement, the Masorti movement, the Reconstructionist movement begins in the early 20th century. All of the movements, even modern Orthodox Judaism, all of the movements in movement Judaism in the non-traditional Jewish world, all of them look at some level to the Wissenschaft movement, and they base their Judaism at some level on the Judaism being pumped out by places like JPS, by places like German scholarship, by the Reformed Seminary. None of them are Kabbalah. Why? Because it's embarrassing. They do not want to look like crazy people. So the Kabbalah is totally sidelined for 2.5, 3 generations by scholars. Completely sidelined. And it's sidelined at a decisive moment in Jewish history. What is that decisive moment? The emergence of the movements. So if you grew up in a movement, the Reform movement, Conservative movement, you grew up in any of the movements, their scholars were simply not being trained on Kabbalah because they weren't being trained on it. They couldn't teach it.
Might be a great time to play that
abandoned.
stupid cue holding on
This is
to
the reason
all
why,
day.
for folks who grew up, especially for folks who are a bit older than me, if you grew up in the movement Judaism world, you've never heard about Kabbalah. There's a reason why. Because the rabbis you had never learned about it. And that's because the generation before them never learned about it, and the generation before them made a decision not to learn about it. And that's what happened. Effectively, Kabbalah becomes decanonized by the modern Jewish movement. Modern Judaism basically decanonized it. So the Zohar, Sefer Yetzirah, all the literature we've talked about basically goes back on the shelf. And what comes back is Talmud, if you're lucky, but mostly Tanakh. That's the reason why you will never really see in the movements until recently studies of Kabbalah, studies of Talmud, even Talmud. I mean, for folks who here who grew up in the movement world, how often did you all study Talmud? How often was Talmud something that you would be encouraged to study or heard about much? I see heads shaking. No. Yeah, even Talmud, right? Even Talmud was sidelined. And you can imagine, Talmud sidelined, then surely Zohar should be sidelined. So that's one part of the story. A huge part of the story is that Kabbalah didn't go away. They still did Kabbalah, studied Kabbalah in the traditional world. It's in the progressive world that it was banned. It was decanonized in our world. And it's only now limping back into canonization. And I think it needs to be recanonized more quickly than that. Of course, the other thing that happens in this time is in the mid-20th century, and there's no way to avoid the elephant in the room. It's of course the Holocaust. The Holocaust devastated, obviously, European Jewry, but in terms of Kabbalah, it really devastated the Hasidic world. And the reason why it devastated the Hasidic world, as you might imagine, is the Hasidic Jews live basically in these very tight-knit social networks. They are distinctively dressed. They look very Jewish. They have payas. They dress like Jews. Targeting them was the easiest thing in the world. In the same shtetl, ghettos. So liquidating them, putting them on these cattle cars was very, very easy. So the Hasidic world was incredibly destroyed in the Holocaust. I think proportionately, and Roz would be the better expert of this than I would be, that the Hasidic world suffered apocalyptic levels of devastation in the Holocaust just because they were basically sitting ducks. And also their theology prevented them from leaving. So many of them, because they rejected Zionism, did not try to flee to Palestine. They thought it was religiously verboten to flee to Palestine because they were also tied to the Rebbe. They also didn't want to individually leave, right? They were tied to this person. And so if the Rebbe leave, they didn't leave. And, last and right, they looked the part. When the Einsteins are moving in, they're there. They're living in that. They're living in that shtetl. And they're there with that Rebbe. And, it doesn't take but a magnitude of a really blackout drunk group of Einsteins to do the deed to basically eliminate an entire Hasidic dynasty. And Chas v'Shalom, that happened. It happened over and over and over again in Eastern Europe, especially Hungary was especially impacted. I think 1 in 4 Satmar people were killed or something like that in the Holocaust. It's just a devastating, apocalyptic story. And as you know, the only people keeping the light on at this time, in many ways, for Kabbalah are the Hasidic people. It's the people in Eastern Europe. It's the traditional people. They're the ones keeping the lights on. And with their it was a devastating blow to Kabbalah. Now, these Sephardic folks, they were still doing Kabbalah in Morocco. They were still doing Kabbalah in Baghdad. Still doing Kabbalah in Northern Africa. So it wasn't like that. The devastating blow that was dealt to European Jews became this very important of the development in Kabbalah. Some of them in America. And in fact, two largest groups. Samar would eventually, Samar Rebbe Teitelbaum eventually made his way out before the war or in the middle of the war, and the Lubavitch Rebbe also made it out as well, and they refounded their Hasidic dynasties in Brooklyn, Holy Land, real Holy Land, which is Brooklyn. So Borough Park and Crown Heights, respectively. You can go visit the Holy Land. It's just right over there in Brooklyn. You folks know this, right? That Israel is just a borough of Brooklyn.
This might be my record for highest score.
It's over there. Just right.
I wouldn't get too excited about it. I might.
Folks, the rebound. How does this all rebound? We have the Holocaust. We have the Haskalah. We have the Wissenschaft movement. How did this rebound? Well, it rebounded in a couple different ways. The rebound, in many ways, began with a young maverick philologist. People forget that Gerhard Scholem, also people forget that he was Gerhard Scholem. He got Gershomized later when he made Aliyah, but Gerhard Scholem was a young maverick philologist. He studied language. That's the reason top notch. You can read everything in the original language. And Scholem made the crazy argument that Kabbalah deserved to be academically studied. It deserves that. It's part of Jewish history. We need to study it. And so in the 1920s, Gerhard would do all the heavy lifting of reading basically every single Kabbalistic book he could get his hands on in the archives. Every single one. And being the good German scholar that he was, he did that. And unlike the Wissenschaft movement that rejected the importance of Kabbalah, Gerhard Scholem convincingly that you couldn't imagine Judaism without it. Judaism was just as important, or Kabbalah was just as important as Judaism as anything else. So Kabbalah had to be reintegrated both academically and historically.
How does it feel to lose? The background podcast.
Well, I'm glad.
Justification for him being able to speak was that
And you still lost by 100 points.
Kabbalah is nonsense, right? Kabbalah is nourishment.
Nobody is paying attention to that.
But, right? Narishkeit is Narishkeit. The Geschichte is Narishkeit. Right? Nonsense. So, Kabbalah is nonsense. But it is science. It's historical information. But God forbid anyone be a Kabbalah. That coming from the most famous secular, the most famous progressive early 20th century, the Talmud professor at JTS, basically invented modern sort of quasi-secular Talmud education, Holy Land. That's how Scholem was introduced. Can you imagine being introduced at the JTS by basically saying, yeah, what you study is nonsense, but because you study it as history, that's something we used to do, it's legitimate. But God forbid anything, that's completely crazy. So Scholem really had to walk an uphill battle the entire time to get legitimacy for what he was doing, which is unimaginable now, considering that Kabbalah is so. But Scholem had to fight that battle, and in many ways, luckily he was a very capable scholar, and he was able to do it. Scholem brought with him an army of students. He attracted a great deal of Dell and Don, folks who have gone on to become themselves leading scholars of the world of Kabbalah. His students were also willing to criticize him, and they did. They made careers criticizing him. Folks like Moshe Yedel really showed how important Scholem was, and also how incomplete Scholem was. And we have a whole generation of scholars, and Zahi Weiss, and all kinds of stuff. Running Groves is a huge group that blow my mind with every academic study of Kabbalah is landed. It is now totally legit if you want to study Kabbalah and in college. You can take an academic level Kabbalah class, and no one's going to bat an eye. Like, sure, part of Jewish history. No, listen. At the same time, there is an emerging, relatively led by, of course, by Rothschild, and he would eventually give rise to religious extremism. Wasn't terribly influenced by, but a lot of the luring themes of exile and redemption will play a part in the rise of Zionism. The most important, I think, Kabbalist to come really in the early to mid 20th century would be Rabbi Rothschild, the Baal HaSulam, the master of the ladder. And the Baal HaSulam would make a Israel, and he would compose Zohar text that he took to write, called Hasulam, the ladder. This is a both all this out of crazy Aramaic that it's in into a very modern Hebrew to make it accessible to a whole generation of people who otherwise would not be able to read it in the original Aramaic. He published it in basically modern Hebrew, modern Lashon Kodesh Hebrew, and so it's much more accessible in the modern Hebrew. So many people who read Zohar now in the Orthodox world, and also many people who study are going to study many of his ideas at some level through the lens of Rabbi. That's based on some of his ideals in Israel, Calvin's. So Yehuda Ashlag becomes a very important, I think, probably the most important character in all this. Another character that I don't mention in this that I can't believe I left out, of course, is Rabbi Menachem ben Schneerson, blessed memory. Schneerson, of course, was the head of the Chabad Lubavitch movement, and what's important to know about him is that, well, he became one of the most important founders of the Kiruv movement, that is to say, the outreach movement among Orthodox Jews and Hasidic Jews. So if you've ever been to a Chabad house, that's because Rebbe sent someone to make one, basically, at least most of them. And Menachem ben Schneerson founded this enormous network of the Chabad movement, and usually important figure in the history of 20th century Judaism. It's really hard to downplay all the really important things he did. But here that's important, that will be important going into 21st century Judaism, is that when he died in the 90s, it was already believed in his lifetime that he was the Messiah, and then when he died, people really began to believe he was the Messiah. And so there is a movement in the Chabad world. It's not a super big movement. I don't think it's as big as it was in the late 90s. And it seems to be mostly localized to Brooklyn and Israel, especially Kfar Chabad, where they believe he's the Messiah. Also at so I have the Menachem ben Schneerson was believed to be the Messiah, and I at a Chabad yeshiva, and I definitely met people who believed that God not heaven somehow bodily, and that he was going to return really soon, and that it really his return would be heralded by Jews adopting more Torah, and that basically he was kind of occluded, and his occultation would come to an end, and the Rebbe would reappear as the King Messiah. Of course, he was to Brooklyn, and he crowns images of the Rebbe's flag, which has a typically yellow with a crown that says Mashiach on Messiah. So there's this huge messianic movement, which again could be a whole class unto itself, inside of the Chabad Lubavitch movement, where they do believe that their late leader is the Messiah. This is causing some serious problems in the Chabad movement, because it is such a movement based on outreach. So in my experience and what I've been told by folks who have grown up in the movement, is that large people that the Messianic stuff appeals to are typically people like Paul Shuvas, who convert back to Orthodox Judaism, and younger people. That most of the more established Chabad world doesn't really get down with this Messiah stuff. Although I think they do still control 7-7, it's the main synagogue in the Chabad world there in Brooklyn on Mr. Parkway. So the Chabad has this messianic thing going on, which is super weird and interesting. for the folks who are in Michigan who are hanging out with me in this class, you probably have never heard about this or heard about it only briefly because the Shemto family, which is a larger Chabad family here in Michigan, is a very old Chabad. Just looking at my way back in the 70s or 80s, leading force in many ways of the anti-Messianist movement. They really thought the Messianist movement was dangerous. And the Shinto family, which is very powerful here, at least in Michigan, has never been on the Messianic camp. And I don't think the Messianic camp has ever gotten a foothold in the Metro Detroit area when it comes to that stuff. That's different in other places, but I think that the Messianic camp has ever gotten a foothold here. All right, the last things I guess I'll mention before we really wrap up is the rise of the Neo-Hasidic movement. As folks know, the Neo-Hasidic movement was pioneered by folks like Mark Buber. World out of, knowledge not the right word, but wanted to sort of modernize and expand the Hasidic movement outside of the dynastic structure. And so many of the tales of the Hasidim and a lot of Hasidic spirituality became exported out of the Hasidic world and then imported into the modern Orthodox world and the conservative world, especially Reconstructionist world most recently in the sort of the Chabad movement. This is a period of Kalbach and stuff like that for folks who grew up with Kalbach and whatnot. And so it's in that world that we have the rise of what might be called the Neo-Hasidic movement. And this movement is proven to be extraordinarily popular in the Jewish world. And there are great luminaries in the Neo-Hasidic world, folks who recently passed away, like Rabbi Rothschild and Art Green, who was probably one of the premier Neo in the world right now. This is really funny at forum, but I got to have a few drinks together and talk about Kabbalah briefly. I feel like I have great honor to be able to hang out with one of the Gaons of the Hasidic movement. And so I got to spend some time with Art Green up in Boston with Alana. So the Neo-Hasidic movement is alive and well, and I think it's popular as ever. I would say that it's actually popularity. And with folks like Joey Weisenberg, folks who are really joking ideas into music, I think that stuff is going to continue. The last thing I'll mention, and this is the thing I imagine some folks already know, is of course mainstream pop culture Kabbalah. The Kabbalah Center, led by Rabbi Berg, which has received a lot of criticism, but whatever. I think that it's Kabbalah as much as anything else is respected. The Kabbalah is they have outfits all over the world. It's sort of the franchises kind of, and they teach a very specific kind of Kabbalah that is tailored toward celebrities, basically. And then there are non-celebrities that get into it. It's a form of sort of kind of new age traditional Kabbalah. But this is made famous by folks like Madonna, and I think Britney Spears was into it for a while, which I think even Britney Spears has a Hebrew tattoo on the back of her neck. Some kind of Kabbalistic tattoo. I don't know. Whatever sense Kabbalistic tattoos make. But, you go, Britney. So like Britney Spears and Madonna also embraced Kabbalah in a pretty profound way, and apparently I think Madonna quit doing concerts on Friday night because of her commitment to certain kinds of Kabbalistic beliefs. I think that the material girl's from here, right? She's from Basic. Madonna's from Basic. So you have Rebbe Madonna who's going on to become influenced very heavily by Kabbalah at some level in her spirituality, although I don't think she's ever converted to Judaism. And there are many other people who've been influenced by the Kabbalah Center. Now, the Kabbalah Center is very polarizing. It's very controversial. I think they've gotten some trouble with money stuff, unsurprisingly. A religious organization getting involved with celebrities and getting in trouble for money stuff. Could you believe that? So, pop culture folks, musicians, and other folks becoming really influenced by Kabbalistic ideas, and those ideas becoming very mainstream, right? Very mainstream. Kabbalah Chai. It's gonna live. Kabbalah is gonna survive at all. It's trace back. The Kabbalah comes through a couple thousand years or 1,000 years now of turns and twists and dead messiahs, apostate messiahs, a mountain of books and commentaries. It's really gone through, I think, almost every kind of travail a religion can go through, a philosophy can go through. No philosophy that I can think of has gone through this much. Platonism or communism or whatever, Kabbalah has gone through so much, and it's had to train. When I think about that, I'm very happy and very to be alive now. We're now living in, at some level, the golden age of Kabbalistic literature. More Kabbalistic literature is available to me than anyone else when it comes to accessible information. More Kabbalistic teachers are available. Secular Kabbalistic education is available. There's a class like this, secular academic class on Kabbalah. Also, 2 dozens of teachers of Kabbalah to become a Kabbalist. And Kabbalah is accessible to people, women, LGBT folks. It's accessible in a way that it never was before. Kabbalah lived, Kabbalah will live, because we're living in an age where the Kabbalah has finally been able to, at some level, withhold its secrets. You have to work hard to become a Kabbalist. Hebrew, learn Aramaic, you might have to move to Israel, to Brooklyn. Do a lot of heavy lifting. Right, so 99% of the Jews, most of history. And there they are, immediately available. English translations of things, Zohar, with the Pritzker edition of the Zohar, massive 12-volume. There was no standard English translation of the Zohar prior to that. Not really. For the first time in history, we have access to all 12 volumes of the Zohar, and new things are coming out every day. So we're living in a golden age. Study of Kabbalah, and we're living in a golden age for those who want to. And I have to say that I'm really happy, and I feel really blessed, and I feel really grateful that all of you have decided to come along with me on this 14-week journey through the history of Kabbalah, because I feel very lucky that I have the privilege and the honor to be able to learn about and share what little I know, and to know that there are people interested in learning about Kabbalah and learning what. And so I just want to thank all of you who hung out with me over the course of the past 14 weeks to learn some Kabbalah together, and to learn about Kabbalah and learn that this tradition is beautiful and strange and science fiction-y, just all over the place, weird and wonderful. And so I just want to express my deep gratitude. Everyone's dropped in for a class or stayed for all 14 or whatever. I'm just really full and really blessed, really thankful for everyone who's taken the time to love with me and giving me the opportunity to learn more about Kabbalah and the purpose of this class. So that's it. Thank you. Thank you. It's really an honor and a privilege to be able. And I look forward to learning with all of you soon. Kabbalah or not. I love it so hard. It's like my secret. My secret desire to do is do a big Zohar class. Both study Zohar and also study about Zohar. We'd have, now imagine kind of a class that would be structured like a science class. You'd have a lecture in the lab. The lecture would be like this. You have a lab. The lab would be like studying the Zohar. Studying it. So I imagine that's my training gigs. A lecture lab class. A little more exciting to me than a lab. So it's a lab. So anyway, folks, that's up to the community, up to y'all. We can do that at some point. But I guess again, I'll just
Hi, Carly.
So
Haters will say it's AI.
Kabbalah outlive us all. And thank you for joining me as I explore the garden that is Jewish mysticism and Kabbalah. Again, if you'd like to support my work by providing accessible, free, and scholarly content on topics like Kabbalah, alchemy, and the occult, magic, and hermetic philosophy, consider supporting my work on Patreon with a one-time donation. You can find it. Until next time, I'm Justin Sledge, and watch Eterica, where we explore the arcane in history, philosophy, and religion.
iCarly, folks, if you're watching this at home, this is a great opportunity for you all to witness iCarlyism. iCarly. To come back. I've been here for years. This would be the greatest comeback in the history of the game, no doubt. In the history of humankind, this should be the greatest comeback in the history of humanity.
Holding to the queue for too long, so it's not really like that's some shit.
How many things are left?
0. Wow, what a joke. Better not lose off school. For the greatest comeback possibly in the history of Wordle. Ten, 9, 8. Oh, not enough to do it.
Even paying attention. Everybody knows that. Everybody fucking knows that. That's garbage. That's fucking. Include mini golf. Dog, I wasn't even paying attention. I was watching a fucking podcast. Yeah, nobody gives a shit what you were doing. I gotta take. Dog. All right, now I'm gonna be focused on you, and I'm gonna beat the fucking shit out of you. You understand this? You understand this?
We're in a dream right now. That's cool.
It was all a dream. I heard up magazine. Everybody knows that. Multitasking, the greatest multitasking kind, shouldn't have even been close. Shouldn't have been close. I'm still multitasking, motherfucker. Everybody knows I'm multitasking. Everybody knows this.
Aren't you gonna take a whiz?
Yeah. Good move. Look at this move. I used to Word Up magazine. Salt and Pepper and Heavy D up in the limousine. Everybody knows that. Everybody knows that.
It's a good Muhammad Ali quote.
Dog, are you gonna